for companies like Flat Tail, if you are going to start a partnership, you need to have third-party oversight of your financials. And that is not
Hmm.
the CPA doing your tax return. Just to make it
No.
clear to everybody,
Yes.
CPAs do not audit your books when they do your
No.
tax return.
They are relying on you to do that. You, as the business owner, need to make sure your books are ready to go to the CPA. And that might mean
Exactly.
having a bookkeeper doing them.
Hey, Jackie,
Hi, Jackie.
you worked in restaurants off and on in your life, right?
I have worked at a lot of restaurants, yes. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
three.
3 restaurants? Yeah.
Yeah.
What did your career span? How many years?
Mm. I had 6 years in college and high school, another probably two, three, four, maybe 10 years altogether, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that I probably also have about 10 years. It's restaurant work has always been like my back pocket plan when I move somewhere new or if I want part-time work somewhere. I've always really loved the camaraderie of the kitchen
Hmm.
because we were always like, it was very much like we're a crew, we're going to get it done together. And that was, when you're working with the right people, it's very fun and exciting.
Yeah. Did you work in the kitchen back of the house?
Yeah, I usually liked the back of the house. I definitely, when I first started, of course, I was a dishwasher at 14, and then
Hmm.
I was a host. And then I started doing front and back at the same time because my sister managed the restaurant. It kind of became a family thing. And then later
Nice.
she bought a restaurant. And then I also did front of the house, back of the house. But the key for me when I had my final position at my sister's restaurant, I was in my early 20s, mid 20s. She asked me to come back and do Sundays because there were so many people waiting to eat at the restaurant. The entire downtown of this little town in Wisconsin would fill with people waiting outside. So I had to, herd the cats, right? I'd have to go out, be going outside. It's kind of like Dizzy Hen here in Philomath. You'd have to go outside and be like, Miller Party of Four, like somewhere on the block.
Wow.
They're there, right? And then when I first moved to Corvallis, I got to work at a restaurant where I cooked all the food in this clay oven with
Oh,
firewood.
yes.
I got to
Nice.
chop up the firewood. But man, I've seen it in restaurants, inappropriate bookkeeping and payroll. And I'm sure you have
It
experienced
does
some
happen.
similar things. So I'd like to share with our audience my last experience of working at a restaurant. So I had moved to Corvallis, and one of my friends was like, hey, you just got done with your degree. You worked really hard for like a year and a half. Just take a break. And I'm not very good at taking breaks. So it wasn't very long of me like chilling out and taking a break before I was like, I want a part-time job. And there was a restaurant that was in walking distance because I hate commuting. That's like one of my tick marks. Like if I don't have to commute, it's the job for me. So I could walk a block or 2 blocks to get to this restaurant. After my first week of work, I went upstairs to the office where one of the owners, the male owner, who was a bit insidious, was handing out paychecks. And so I went upstairs to get my paycheck. And he says to me, Sparkle, because they'd already given me a nickname, he's like, hey, Sparkle, we normally don't pay people for their first week of work. We give them gift cards to the restaurant instead because usually for the first week they're useless and don't get any work done. But since you were able to get work done, I'm giving you a paycheck.
Oh my gosh.
Now,
What?
I want our audience just to think about this for a moment. Most restaurant workers are making just above minimum wage,
Or they're
and
making minimum wage.
or they're making minimum wage, and they can't afford to eat at this restaurant. Like none of us working there could really afford to eat at this restaurant because it was a higher end
Totally.
restaurant. So instead of giving somebody money for, I don't know, car insurance, housing, they were giving them free, food in exchange for work. But it was food that was more expensive and out of I
Well, they
don't know
wouldn't
what,
be buying it anyway. Yeah.
yeah, like it's that socioeconomic level would never be buying food from there. And so he is damn lucky he gave me a paycheck because I had already worked as an office manager, HR person, accounting person, and I knew the law.
Yeah.
And it's completely illegal
Good for you.
to do that, right?
Yeah.
He would have ended up in a lawsuit if he had done that to me because I wouldn't have tolerated it. It is abuse. In my
It
opinion, it
is.
is abuse.
I've worked at places where they would have a meeting and you wouldn't clock in for it. And I was like, no, because I had worked somewhere else where
Mhm.
I knew that if you're at work to do something, like it's even if you're sitting there listening, like you're there, you're getting paid, right?
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
getting paid. And so, one of the things I'd like the listeners to understand is if you're going out to dinner, you should expect to pay a premium for those meals. You should not expect to get a low cost meal at a restaurant because all the employees need to get paid a living wage.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, we are not giving a living wage to our restaurant workers right now.
No.
So we're supporting in a lot of ways mandatory poverty by wanting to have low cost meals when we go out to eat.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's important to have a minimum wage that's like a living wage too. I worked at this chain restaurant for a long time, and everywhere I worked, I always made minimum wage because I was always front of house wait staff, so we got tips. But whenever minimum wage would go up here in Oregon, the manager would be like, "Oh, why don't you guys like you're just going to pay more in taxes?" Like it wouldn't make a difference, and it's like, what? Like, sure, we're going to pay more in taxes, but also not like equal to the amount of the wage. Oh, it was
Yeah.
very annoying.
And you're
Yeah.
lucky that you have done your restauranting in Oregon because when I started restauranting in Wisconsin, they
Yeah.
have a different minimum wage for wait staff, and it
Yes.
was $3 an hour.
Yes. I can't even imagine. No, in Oregon, it's the whatever the minimum wage is what you get. But you're right.
Yeah.
In some other states, you get like a few dollars an hour. Like
Yeah.
what? Because you're
Mhm.
making tips.
Yeah. Now, if you're at a high-end restaurant, you're a chef, maybe you're making decent money. And if you are working at a higher end restaurant, front of the house, meaning wait staff, you
Hmm.
probably are making decent money.
You might
But
be. Yeah.
you might be. But the vast majority of restaurants are not high-end restaurants where you're expecting to pay $50 for the meal by the time you get your alcoholic beverage and a dessert. You know,
Hmm.
most people are not prepared to be paying $50 a meal. And therefore, the wait staff and kitchen staff are not getting a living wage.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they're not.
So there's lots of bizarre things that go on in restaurants, though. Everything from,
There sure are.
money under the table. Did you experience that where they were siphoning off cash and not recording it as income?
Yes.
So there's the cash siphoning.
That
There's
definitely
the
happens. Lots of cash, although less now
less
after
now.
COVID. The rest
Yeah,
the restaurants have to like get money out of the bank in order to pay their bartenders at the end of the night because
yeah,
everything's on credit cards. Yeah.
yeah. So now
Sorry.
that we live in a world of credit cards, it's much harder to hide both the tips and the income. And so,
Hmm.
unfortunately, restaurants are in this very weird position. You can read about how most restaurants don't survive the first few years. So, it's hard to get bank loans because most restaurants don't survive. And really,
Hmm.
the restaurant industry is based on this basically low to no profit.
Hmm. Yeah,
And the only way that's going to change is if people are willing to spend more when they go out to dinner.
for sure. Definitely.
Yeah. Because the
Well,
push
and the
pull
cost
is
of food keeps
always,
going up. Yeah,
yeah,
which makes it even harder for the restaurants. Yeah.
Yeah, with food prices increasing. And then there's always the concern that if you increase the price to the point where you're actually going to be making money, then people won't come to the restaurant. And
Yep.
so the restaurant industry is very interesting in a number of ways. And it can be difficult to find employees that are willing to work. So when you've worked at all your different restaurants, did you ever work with people that they were highly likely not actually legal workers in the US?
I did. I don't think I did. No, I think everyone was paid with a paycheck,
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
W-2 at the end of the year. Yeah.
Mm. I remember reading an article, which I'm sorry, folks, I won't be able to provide it for you, but it was an article about somebody who was avoiding I-9s and hiring people that were not legal to work in the US. Now, there's lots and lots of industries, whether you like it or not, folks, there's lots and lots of industries that are actively hiring people that cannot actually fill out an I-9 form stating that they can legally work in the US. And it's because they cannot find workers. So if people that are able to work in the US legally are not willing to be a dishwasher, and a dishwasher is needed, we're going to end up with people hiring folks that do not have the right kind of legal status to work in the US. And so then the problem is, and what happened with this company, so this particular company, this article, they owned multiple restaurants in California. They also owned multiple houses, boats, yachts, expensive vehicles. So the owners of this company were making very, very good money. Whether they were siphoning it off illegally, yeah, you'd think good for them until you find out that it turns out they were actively hiring people that were not legal to work that didn't have legal status to work in the US, and they were not paying them minimum wage.
Yeah.
Because the people that didn't have legal status didn't have any power. And so they were being paid very, very small hourly wages. And that's how these people made their fortunes. And then guess what, folks? The government took everything. The government confiscated everything because they're hiring people that were not legal, and then also not following minimum wage laws and overtime laws and break laws, like you name it, they were breaking all the laws. And so when the state and federal agencies came in to do an audit, they ended up confiscating these people's homes, vehicles, yachts, everything. They took everything from them. So it can be a risky.
It's a hard lesson to learn for them.
It's a hard lesson to learn. Yes. Plus they went to jail, so it's a pretty hard lesson. Yeah. But we recently had an event occur locally here with a restaurant.
We did?
And there are lots
I'm pretending
of
to be surprised here.
What's
I'm
that?
aware.
You are aware.
I said I was pretending to be surprised.
Yeah. But
I'm still figuring out my podcast personality.
Right? You're working on your podcast personality. Like, what? That happened? So I will read one of the final words. So this is in an article in the newschoolbeer.com. So recognizing this is a quote from them. And one of the last statements of the article says, Flat Tail Brewing will go down in history as a great local success story that imploded in a dramatic fashion.
Yeah.
Dun, dun.
Oh, that's such a sad story. But unfortunately, it's not a unique story.
Yeah. So, do you have any quotes from the article that stood out for you?
I do. I think maybe we should give a summary of what happened.
Yeah, let's give a summary of what happened. So, as best as we can tell, after reading a few articles, there were a number of owners that owned a brewery / sports bar. And one of the owners was in charge of the brewing specifically. And in one article, it wasn't the New School Brew article, but in another article, he had stated that he was getting financial statements every few months.
Okay.
And then the day came when one of the partners walked up to him and said, "We owe hundreds of thousands of dollars in back taxes and we have no money." And they had to shut down. Now, so that's the summary. They had an owner that was doing all the bookkeeping, and then those
The
owners
bookkeeping and the payroll.
and the payroll. So there was one owner that was doing all the bookkeeping and all the payroll, and then the managers were getting financial reports. Other articles said every few months, which to me means they were probably only getting financial reports quarterly. What am I missing about the story, Jackie?
So yeah, the owners that were doing, or the owner that was, it was his partner. They had a payroll business. So on the side, he had a payroll business, and his wife or spouse was doing the payroll and the bookkeeping. And so they were, it turns out, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars out of the company to like cover the payroll costs and things like that. Turns out they weren't even running the payroll, another company was. When the guy who's like discovered everything found this out, he realized they had been misleading him, and there was a different payroll company, and they had just been pulling all this money out. And so this poor Flat Tail is taking out loans. They're not doing well. They have this story of like, oh, we just can't, there's, it's too difficult. There's all this competition. And then people who turns out were embezzling said, oh, we're in this really bad financial spot. And he's like, what are you talking about? What's the information? And I did get the quote here because it was a pretty good quote. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. So he says on Thursday, we're having a rough time. Then the next day he says, actually, we're 6 figures in debt. We owe $100,000 in back taxes. And this guy's like, what are you talking about? And then on Monday, he's like, we have to close the business in 4 months. We're canceling all of it. We can't do this. So it turns out they had been transferring hundreds of thousands of dollars to this other account, which was their payroll company that they owned. And the quote is, and that is when it went from there is something wrong to, oh my God, I think our partners are embezzling money from us. So then it goes on. Yeah. It was just, at that point, it's like 4 years of litigation to try to get everything sorted out. And then there was all these counter claims filed by the people who were embezzling. And this guy had to pay out of pocket to basically get a resolution from any of it. It's just such a mess. Yeah.
There's another quote where it says a meeting was called between the 6 partners because there were married couples as partners as well. So a meeting's called between the 6 partners, and everyone had the same question for the couple that was managing the finance side: when, why, what, and how much. And the quote says, no matter how many times we asked the same question, we weren't getting any answers. We kept hearing the business doesn't have any money. We weren't making money. The pub isn't profitable, hasn't been for months, which is completely opposite from everything they've been seeing and hearing.
Right? Yeah, they were booming.
Financial statements they were getting were not telling this story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
what do you think about this?
Well, my very first thing that I want to say, and you know how much I love to bring up this topic, but a vagina is not an accounting degree. Handing the bookkeeping and payroll off to the female business partner happens all the time. And often the female business partner has no history doing bookkeeping, has no understanding of bookkeeping, has no understanding of payroll. And at best, you're going to get bad bookkeeping.
At
best. So that means your financial statements are garbage and don't show reality. That's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is you end up in a situation where there's all these things that are being done that are actually illegal, and that the taxes are not being done. And if you have bad books, then your financial statements are not accurate, which means your tax returns are not accurate.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing that bothered me about this was all of the stuff was passed to the female partner, expected to handle everything and do everything. And that's not how it worked out. What is one of your big takeaways of this?
Well, my thought is, how often are you looking at the books, right? Because we both do a lot of bookkeeping, and you know that it can be difficult to get a business owner to look at their financial statements. And even if they're looking at it, do they have any idea what they're looking at? Right? Because this guy was getting the financial statements periodically. But if he's not able to like figure out what he's looking at, then who cares what they say? And obviously, we can talk about how to prevent this, which I think we should. But I think, there's clearly a lack of controls, right? Which for our listener, accounting controls are things, systems or processes that are put into place to prevent stuff like this from happening. So it's like usually another set of eyes looking at something, breaking up duties a certain way so that people are, because, when you hand everything off to a bookkeeper or a payroll provider or one person's doing all of that, you're trusting that they're doing everything correctly. And they shouldn't also have access to controlling the money, which is what it was happening here.
Mm-hmm. And the most outspoken partner, who is the person being interviewed in this article by New School Brew, he says he had just turned 22 when they asked him to join into this partnership. And so even if he had gone to college for business, the average 22-year-old and the average human being really in general are not very well equipped to understand financial statements without some training.
Yeah.
And if I was in a partnership, I would want to be able to look at the bank accounts, right? Have access to get the bank statements delivered to me and be able to look at what I call the third-party documentation that backs up the balance sheet, right?
Right.
So where this 22-year-old, and then he said he spent like a third of his life dealing with the lawsuits, so this has been going on for years.
Yeah.
And I finally finished up with one judge saying, yes, the people that were in charge of the money were wrong, and you owe a bunch of money to your partners. He is now older, and is during all this time, I think the article says that he got married, and is like going on to his adult life. But one of the biggest mistakes that people make is thinking that the bookkeeping isn't a big deal, and that it's just a busy work thing that you're forced to do. And so just pass it off to anybody because it doesn't matter. And this is a great story showing why it really, really does matter. And I have seen plenty of embezzlement occurring with family members. So the listeners might be thinking to themselves, well, it's a good thing my sister, spouse, mom, brother is doing the bookkeeping because I can trust them. Well, let me tell you, no, you can't. I've seen plenty of examples of children embezzling from their parents' company, family members. So there, like you had said, there has to be good controls. We have to have good accounting controls in place so that this doesn't happen. And it was that the quote that I read about, that nothing matched up and then they weren't getting the information. That is a quote that I have heard so many times from business owners about the bookkeeper, even a bookkeeper they hire. Maybe it's not even a partner or a family member, it's a bookkeeper they hire. And the not being able to get straight answers, not being able to explain what the numbers are and how they came to be is something that a lot of people experience.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you can't get answers, then there's usually a problem. It could be that the problem is they're just not clear on what they're doing, or they're not caught up and they're embarrassed or something like that. But it could be a sign of something really bad going on.
Yep, exactly. And so, what are the things that the Flat Tail Brewery should have done so that they did not end up in court for years, closing the business, and having $100,000 issues?
Yeah. Well,
With
do you
where
mean
the
what could they
money
have
went?
done to prevent the embezzlement? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, Jackie Shaw.
Oh my. Rockwell's putting me on the spot, people. Well, the very first thing is that they should have outsourced the payroll. I will tell you right now, people, you should not have novices doing your payroll.
No.
You need somebody who is up to date on employment law, wage and hour law. Obviously, they're not your HR person, but they have to be able to tell you when you're about to do something that's illegal. And
exactly, because even if you have someone who's not purposely doing nefarious acts, they might just have no idea what they're doing, and because they're not trained in tax law, payroll tax law, and make so much mistakes, and then you have so much in penalties and taxes and interest. Yeah, it can add up very fast.
Yeah,
exactly.
And the tax laws are always changing. In Oregon, suddenly there's the STT tax, and now there's the PLO tax. And so you have to stay up to date on all these things. We should do a different podcast about what just happened in Oregon this year, where a judge ruled that you have to pay your employees for every minute. And the article I read, I have to investigate it, but the article I read looks like I'm going to have to start switching my timesheets from being quarter hour, which is how we invoice clients, to being to the minute. And that has a direct impact on how I invoice clients. Unless I find an app that can do both, can give me totals by the minute and totals by quarter hour. It's horrible. And so you never know what's going to be coming at you with the wage and hour laws. And somebody has to stay current and up to date on that. So what are the things they should have done? Number one, they absolutely should have outsourced payroll so that they know that somebody else is making sure the taxes are paid and the quarterlies are done. Then I would have wanted one of the partners every year to be in charge of the financial audit. And this is what I mean by that. There's 6 partners. They could have all taken turns. The other 5 partners could have taken turns on being the person that gets copies of the quarterly reports and the confirmations of federal and state tax payments, so that they could literally look at a quarterly report and say, we should have paid this much money, and then be able to look at a report with the state and feds and say, yes, we did pay that much money. There are very easy math audits that partners could do to confirm that everything is accurate. And then getting the bank statement and looking at the bank statement, saying the bank statement, what activity is in the bank statement? Does it all look reasonable? And does it match up with the financial statements? That's something that a novice could do as long as someone showed them how to do it. And it's the kind of things, I mean, you've been treasurers of nonprofits. I've been a treasurer of a nonprofit. I'm one right now. This is the kind of stuff that if you're a treasurer of a nonprofit, you're supposed to be keeping an eye on these kinds of things, right?
Right. Yeah.
And having access to them. And to me, it's the same kind of thing with this company, is the partners should have taken turns doing little audits to prove that the financials are accurate. And that's not against the person doing the bookkeeping. It's just good business practice, right? It's not saying we don't trust you. It's saying this is just proper business practice.
Yeah, access to the financial statements, and then also access to where the receipts are kept, being able to just look at some stuff, right? But there's no access. That's
Yeah.
just bad news, bad idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where we get into the 80-20 rule, that 80% of the issues are usually caused by 20% of the whatevers, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
you could do an 80-20 audit, which would be that 20% of the transactions on your bank statement are 80% of your money. So there's going to be a small amount of activity that's the largest dollar amount, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you did an 80-20 audit, you'd go through a bank statement, you'd look for the biggest ticket things, and then you'd have to prove it's real by finding the receipt or the bill.
That's easy, right?
Yeah, it's pretty darn easy. It's just matching up things. Again, a novice could do it if they were taught how.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the biggest mistakes this company made is they weren't willing to pay somebody in the bookkeeping industry to
Yep.
make sure that everything was okay.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that could have been just like consulting time, like teach me how to do a little audit, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
What
that's one
are
of the
other
things.
ways? Yeah.
Well, they should have been getting financial statements every month, period.
Totally. Yeah.
I mean, the idea that you're running a large business like this and you're only looking at financial statements quarterly is insane,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Now, I realize there are some people in our community that are investors and they tend to invest in companies. So they're not managing partners, but they've done
Mm-hmm.
cash infusions. And in those cases, usually those people do only get financials quarterly.
Sure.
But this kind of company had more of a mom and pop kind of feel, right? It's a group of local
Mm-hmm.
owners. They're all taking part in ownership. So they should have been taking part in the oversight of the money. And they
Right.
didn't. They all dropped the ball. They just assumed if the one woman would take care of everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They could have had a bookkeeper do the reconciling for the company and create the financial statements every month so that a third party person was actually looking at the data and making sure what's on the financial statements is real and accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a good
And
option.
that would have been an amazing option, and it wouldn't have cost that much money.
Mm-hmm.
They probably
No,
would
not
have
at all.
spent a couple $100 a month, maybe,
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
to have
Which in the
somebody
long
oversight.
run would have been a lot better.
In the right, so the audience, let's think about this. If you're in a lawsuit for like 6 years or something, think about how much you paid the lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
weren't willing to pay a bookkeeper a couple $100 a month to do oversight and maybe a few $100 a month to do payroll. Instead, you'd like to save all that money up and then multiply it times 10 and pay it to a lawyer.
Yeah. No. Yeah. So how could people, so if you're going into business with someone, or say you're starting a restaurant, right? What are some takeaways here?
Yeah, I think some of the takeaways are the books have to stay up to date always. In the
Mm-hmm.
article, you get the sense that the bookkeeping was behind and it wasn't kept up to date, and so the financials were not accurate. So, one of the big takeaways is we need to make sure that everything stays up to date all the time and we get financial statements timely, right? In Brass Jacks, our company, one of our 5 foundational things is current, right?
Mm-hmm.
Books have to stay current. And so that's step one, is the books have to stay current. And then because of accounting controls, if a person has the ability to spend the money, they're not supposed to be reconciling the account.
That was my thing. Like, what? Yeah, if they had a big enough company, they could have easily been having some good accounting controls, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And this gets us back to what we were talking about earlier, which is the how much does it cost to run a restaurant? And how much do end users need to pay for food in order for the employees to get paid a living wage and for there not to be freaking embezzlement?
Yeah.
Like, how
Exactly.
many more pennies would you have to add to the beer to cover the cost of my bookkeeper? Not much, people, not much. But they didn't do it
Yeah.
because people don't respect bookkeeping. It used to, when you look at the history of bookkeeping, it used to be a very prestigious job. We were all called accountants,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a very prestigious job. And
Mm-hmm.
as the world has changed over the hundreds of years since the beginnings of bookkeeping, we have found ourselves in a position where most people don't think bookkeeping is important or really necessary, and that it's easy to do and anybody can do it without any education or oversight.
Yeah.
And then they find themselves in trouble, like Flat Tail did.
Yeah. And those are the people that come to us. Most of our students, I think, are people who have been thrown into the bookkeeping industry because that's what
Mm-hmm.
happens. Like what you were just saying. I'm good with numbers and I'm married to the person who owns the business, or I'm somehow related to them, or they know me. And so now I'm a bookkeeper. It's like there's no training. They don't actually know how to do anything intentionally, right? It's just all kind of like, okay, I have this thing I need to pay now. I'm going to Google how to do that and click around and okay, I did that. Okay, what's the next thing, right? And it's just all of these little tasks, but none of it's tied up, or none of it is, there's no concept of really how everything is supposed to, because everything works together, right? That's the whole point of the double entry bookkeeping,
Yeah.
the accounting, double entry. Yeah. And so it's like, no, when you do one thing, it affects the other parts of the books. And it really, like, there's so much that people just don't really understand. They think that they just go in and they click this button and then they click that button and they're done. They did it.
Yeah. And what I find is that people are just obsessed with the check register. Like
Mm,
they do all their data entry in the check register, and it's like all they focus on is the register, the register. And I can't stand it. I hate the check register. I don't think anybody should go in it or touch it, because all people end up doing is making a mess. Because either they're
yeah.
doing the data entry wrong because they're trying to enter it in the register, and for that industry it's not accurate, and they don't put all the data in. So there's
Mm-hmm.
no way of like looking into things later and being able to quickly do a little audit, because the vendor names are missing. And now,
Yeah.
because of the bank feed world, it's even worse. It's also just focused again on the check register, right? And bookkeeping and financial
Yes.
statements are not the check register. It's a profit and loss. It's a balance sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And those things don't just happen. You have to know how to do bookkeeping to
Yep.
get everything in the right bucket.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I am always amazed at the number of people that get themselves in a situation where they have to pay lots and lots of money to get their books fixed because
Yeah.
they've been done wrong for so long.
Yeah. You can have a bookkeeping business just fixing people's books and you will not run out of work.
Yeah. My span of the adjustments that I have to do to people's books when I clean up, the normal span that I've seen is about $30,000 to $300,000. 30 to 300,000. I've had 300,000 projects. Has to get peeled off the balance sheet because it was entered incorrectly, and then has to be put onto the profit and loss as a prior year adjustment.
Oh, that's
And
rough.
it could be income or it could be expense, right? So
Yeah.
maybe you get lucky and it's $30,000 of additional expenses that you didn't take when you should have, because
Mm-hmm.
your books were wrong, so your taxes were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I have clients that are like, I had to pay, $300,000 in taxes last year. Now this year I'm not paying any money in taxes. Well, it's because they're not doing their bookkeeping correctly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so specifically for companies like Flat Tail, if you are going to start a partnership, you need to have third-party oversight of your financials. And that is not
Mm-hmm.
the CPA doing your tax return. Just to make it
No.
clear to everybody, CPAs
Yes.
do not audit your books when they do your
No.
tax return.
They are relying on you to do that. you as the business owner need to make sure your books are ready to go to the CPA. And that might mean
Exactly.
having a bookkeeper doing them,
Yeah.
not you.
So exactly. So when we think about this company, the big takeaway here, folks, is you just cannot have one person doing all the financial stuff with no oversight, because it just feeds the possibility of embezzlement, makes embezzlement so much easier. And in other podcasts, we'll talk about other exciting embezzlement stories that we have come across in our own lives and what we have seen in articles that end up in the newspaper. Obviously, ideal, you never want your company to end up in the newspaper with articles like this, right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be here and
No.
have this public spectacle of complete chaos and definitely drama.
Yeah. No, that's not fun. It sounds awful what this guy has gone through. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was young. And I think that, I mean, you were touching on that earlier, but I think it seems like he got taken advantage of. I know that they were said that they were friends, but clearly you don't do that to your friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, you just never know who's going to
Yeah.
embezzle. And so one of the things that I, feel very strongly about is bookkeepers that are like, this is mine. I don't want anybody touching it or looking at it. Like, I'm going to go on vacation, but I don't want anybody doing the bookkeeping while I'm gone. Don't sit at my desk. The other red flags are bookkeepers that like work long hours. They take their lunch break at their desk. And too often business owners see that as commitment to the organization, when actually it's quite possible it's somebody guarding their embezzlement. They don't want anybody to look at it or touch it because they're doing nefarious things.
Yeah.
And so business owners really got to get their heads on straight when it comes to that topic. Like, we should not be focusing on which employees are the most loyal. Like, loyalty shouldn't have anything to do with our business world.
Yeah.
It's just that, like, take that off the table. Don't worry about who's loyal, who's showing up and doing their job correctly, right?
Right. Whose work is verifiable.
Yes.
Yeah.
And who's open to cross training and things like that, that actually add value to the company. When you have people that are cross trained so people can cover for one another, that's a much better company than having these silos of people that don't know anything about what the other person's doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Leslie Shiner, who is one of the leaders in the accounting world, specifically job costing, I saw her at a presentation and I love this quote of hers. She says, delegate, don't abdicate. And most business owners, including all the partners of this brewery, abdicated their bookkeeping to somebody instead of delegating. Delegating means that maybe you trust, but you verify. Delegating is giving guidance and having oversight. Abdicating is just throwing the work at somebody and saying, nobody wants to deal with it, you deal with it, and not really caring. Every business owner and every nonprofit board member should make a point to ask at least 3 questions about the financial statements when you get them. And you should get them every month. Yeah. So you should come up with 3 questions. And I'm on a board right now, and some of the board members better be watching this video and hearing me. I want everybody to ask 3 questions about the financials.
3 questions.
The next board meeting, because everybody should be looking at them and trying to understand them. I understand accounting is very confusing to people, and that's what's so fascinating. In one side of our world, we have bookkeeping is nothing easy, who cares about it? And then on the other side, people are terrified of it and don't understand it.
Because it's numbers. People are scared of the numbers. Yeah. I've been in board meetings, and people will, like, the financials just get approved. No one's even looking at them, I'm like, What? No, we got questions here. Like, what is this? How did you come up with it? What's making up this number? I love it when I get, questions from a board, right? As a bookkeeper. Like, yes, please ask the questions. I'm not perfect always, right? I might have put something somewhere that you don't actually want to see it, right? Maybe it makes sense to be in a different account and I didn't know or whatever. But yeah, I think that you're right. 3 questions. That's a good rule of thumb. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And the treasurer needs to
So,
be able to answer those.
yeah, and the treasurer needs to
Yeah.
be able to answer them or be able to go back to
Or
the
go
bookkeeper
get
and
the
get the
answers.
answers and make
Yes.
sure they follow through.
Yes.
Don't just leave it hanging.
Right.
So, the big lesson learned from this local brewery that ended up in the paper and ended up spending a lot of money on lawyers
Yeah.
is that you should not abdicate your bookkeeping,
Mm-hmm.
especially abdicating your bookkeeping to one of the women, because it's woman's work. That's a huge mistake. Huge.
Yep.
And there should have been an outside accounting oversight.
Yeah.
There should never have been this insular, we'll just have one of the partners do it, who cares kind of scenario. And they should have been getting financials every single month. And one of the partners, every year, one of the partners should have been designated as like the treasurer. And they work with the bookkeeper to make sure the reports get out and ask questions and look at third-party documentation to prove those financials are accurate.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Those are good. Those are the good takeaways, I think. Good job,
Yeah.
Jackie Shaw.
Thanks. Good job, Jackie Rockwell. So we respect and appreciate all of the people working in the restaurant world right now. It is not an easy job. If you're in the back of the house, it is hard work. If you're in the front of the house, you have to deal with the public. And so I would ask all of you to show some grace for the restaurant workers. And maybe your order will not be exactly correct like you ordered it. You know, is that the battle you want to fight, or you just want to let it go? Right? It's one thing if you're allergic to the food they give you. But, if I ask for no cheese and I get the sandwich and it has cheese on it, I just peel the cheese off. I don't need to ruin
Does it come
anybody's
right
day.
off?
Just peel it right off. I really feel like the US population, because it's not like this in Europe, the US population has to show more respect to restaurant workers and bookkeepers.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We are victims of entitled people.
Yes.
It's true, though. People go to restaurants and they're suddenly so entitled to just, everyone jumping through hoops. And yeah, that's the
Yeah.
thing. Because it is not easy to just suddenly make a dish differently when you're making 40 dishes at one time. You've got this big line going, it's dinner rush, and people want things so different. It's like, yeah, that's more work. Yes, you want less of something, but you're also causing more work usually.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's okay to ask for, no onions on it or something like
Of course.
that. But you do have to realize they're not cooking one meal at a time. They're probably
Right.
making, like Jackie said, they're probably making 8 of those plates, and yours is the one without onion, and it is assembly line. So the person working has to remember to not do onions on that one plate. Well, it's going to happen sometimes, but not always.
Yep. Or things will get switched by accident and someone else got yours. And yeah.
Yeah.
It's a whole process. And normally it works really well, but there's always, errors
glitches
that occur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're human.
So just please give some grace to those restaurant workers, because they're doing you a favor by doing that job. And it is not easy work. It is physically difficult. It is emotionally difficult. And you really don't get paid in equal to the difficultness. If I'm just trying to say it right. Like, there isn't a balance between how much emotional and physical energy goes into it and how much you get paid. It is a disproportional ratio.
Yes. 20% minimum tip.
Yeah, and then there's the tipping folks. I'm all for minimum wage going up and getting rid of the tips. Just
Oh, I would be
embedding.
fine with that if we were
Yeah.
paying people a living wage, but we're currently not. So tip away.
Yep. Tip away, tip away.
Yeah. All right. I think we did it. That's a
We
wrap.
did it.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to our podcast and getting a chance to talk finance
Whatever
with
it's
the
called.
Jackies, with the whatever
Ah,
it's
yeah.
called podcast. So this is Jackie Shaw and
Jackie Rockwell saying,
avoid embezzlement.
have a good day.
If you appreciate this conversation about embezzlement and want to learn more, we are holding a training in May called Accounting Controls 101. You can sign up at brassjacks.com/accounting-controls-101. We'll see you there.